Well, it's a couple minutes after 9 o'clock, so I think we'll start the seminar for today. Thank everyone very much for tuning in today. We're very happy. This is our third Seed Talk series for 2021. And we're very pleased that Discovery Seeds Labs is presenting this one called Seed Quality Across the Prairies. And this entire series is hosted by the Saskatchewan Seed Growers Association in partnership with Manitoba and Alberta seed growers. A couple notes at the beginning. Everyone will be placed on mute during the presentations and the Q&A session. If there's an echo, someone has both their phone and computer audio on. If you have both on, press pound and your participant number, and then pound on your phone, and your computer audio will be disconnected. If you're having technical difficulties, text Jeff at 403-975-9981 or email at jeff@colesag.com. This seminar is being recorded. There's two ways to ask questions. You can do the Q&A where you type in your question and then it'll be relayed to the panelists, and then the response might be live or it might be typed. All questions will be read out for those people who are joining us by phone. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly during the Q&A, and then we will unmute you. Just remember to unmute yourself, which would be your microphone icon or pressing *6 on the phone. Then you would mute yourself again once you've finished your question. The raise hand feature is in the webinar controls. We will see when your hand is raised, and then we'll click lower hand when you're done. On a mobile device, you type in your pound and your participant ID and pound, and then you'll see the controls at the bottom, like this picture. So our agenda today is we will have a report from Manitoba first, then Alberta and Saskatchewan, and then a quick Q&A on any of those reports. Then we'll have a short presentation from our sponsor for today, Discovery Seed Labs. And that'll be followed up with a presentation by Mike Harding on bacterial leaf streak. And then there'll be a Q&A after his presentation as well. So starting this morning, we're going to start with Shari Lafreniere. She's the Senior Seed Analyst and the Lab Manager for 2020 Seed Labs, and she's going to give us the Manitoba report. Shari?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Laurie, for that introduction. I just am going to share my screen here, and we'll get that going. Sorry, it's taking a minute. So hopefully everyone will see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So that worked. That's great. Okay, so yes, good morning again, and thank you for inviting us to participate in your seed quality talk today. What a great foundation you for talking amongst provinces, I guess, with being with Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. I know we also often have a lot of questions about how things are going out there in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and so this allows us to get a quick view of how things are going for you. So just a quick rundown of who we are as 2020 Seed Labs. We have two fully accredited seed labs, one in Nisku, Alberta, which is our head office, and then here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We were founded in 1989, and we were one of the first privately owned labs in Canada. And over 30 years later, we're still independently and privately owned and operated. So we are constantly evolving to meet the industry demands. We love interacting with our clients, seed growers, farmers, industry members. We are fully accredited for all crop kinds. We are also ISTA accredited, the International Seed Testing Association in Nisku, Alberta, and we have several registered seed technologists through AOSA on staff. We also provide seed import and export services, including participating in the CFIA Regal program. We also provide pedigreed seed crop inspection across the prairies in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and so much more, including molecular diagnostics and plant pathology. So again, thank you. And just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today. I won't keep you long. Just a quick overview of the weather in 2020, and we believe seed quality starts with field conditions and what's happening during growth. What to test for is a common question we get. Everyone knows germination, but what else should we do? And just then I'll show you some statistics, some crop kind comparisons, focusing mostly on germination and vigor and some disease as well. So first topic of conversation is going to be the weather in Manitoba. This lovely little picture is myself in 2019 and out inspecting soybean fields for pedigreed seed crop inspection. It was quite the year for soybeans in Manitoba in 2019, and so just a little precursor to our 2020 weather report. So 2020, thankfully, we did not see any major catastrophes overall in Manitoba. As was with Saskatchewan and Alberta, of course, there's regional issues. Some spots in the province had some issues, but overall, things went pretty well from harvest, from planting to harvest. Made us very excited here in the lab to see some really great quality seeds start coming through in September. So beginning with plant 2020, of course, we had some good snowfall over 2019, 2020, and residual moisture from the horrible fall we had. Lots and lots of moisture out there. So great soil conditions, great soil moisture for plant 2020. We got through the growing season without any major drought issues, no extended periods with no rainfall. There were some areas where it started to get dry, but thankfully we were smiled upon with rain. We didn't see the early snowfall that we did in 2019 for the soybean harvest. So September is soybean season here in Manitoba, and so the early snowfall in 2019 really wreaked havoc on the soybeans that were standing in the fields. The pods were full, the seed was looking good, and then we got a lot of rain and a lot of snow and some cold weather, and the beans absorbed moisture, then shrunk back down, then absorbed moisture again, and they were really impacted. So we had some earlier frosts here in Manitoba in 2020. They may have impacted the soybean yields in some areas, but overall it was okay. The frost didn't impact yields too much. As was with Saskatchewan and Alberta, I know we had some crazy high wind events over the summer that made for some interesting challenges when harvest came around. We also had some wind problems with emergence in canola fields, so there was some fields that had to be replanted in June. So yeah, when harvest rolled around, those swaths were not in perfect lines, and there was lots of shatter loss if the canola was swath, and oats as well. We saw that happen. Oats mature quite quickly, and so once they were dry and those winds happened, they sure knocked the heck out of the seeds. So. And then there was some herbicide application issues in some areas because of the wind, and farmers just didn't have the window to get onto the field with the high winds. So then harvest rolls around, and we had a great year this year in Manitoba for harvest. Started cereals in early August. Things were they rolled around quite nicely. Crop inspection, we were in the fields in late July for the cereal crop inspection. And then we didn't have any major rain events or major drought events, so the crop that was standing in the field at harvest, moisture conditions were quite optimal, so that made for some good conditions. We didn't have to dry a lot of seed in Manitoba this year. So yeah, that was 2020 in a nutshell for weather. So we were quite happy with our conditions. Oh, sorry about that. So just a precursor to the seed quality seed testing. What should I test for? We get many phone calls of farmers, first-time clients or new to the industry, and they just don't know what they need to know in regards to seed quality for their seed. Everyone knows germination, of course. Germination is used for assigning pedigree grade names, so it's a required test. Just put an example of the grade table for wheat there, and just showing the columns there with minimum percentage of germination required for wheat and durum wheat. So germination in seed analyst talk is, we call it the perfect world. So it's described as the maximum potential a seed has for growth under optimal conditions. So the seed is not under any stress at all to begin its growth. It's a CFIA accredited test, so we're told which methods to use by the CFIA, and we categorize the seedlings that grow into 4 or 5 categories depending on the crop kind. So normals, abnormals, deads, fresh, and hard seed. So vigor testing, we like to say it's the real world. So tests a seed lot's potential to perform vigorously during germination and emergence, and it indicates how a seed lot will perform under less than ideal or stressful conditions. So I like to say that it more mimics what's going on in Manitoba at seeding time, because it's not 20 degrees with perfect moisture conditions in April and May in Manitoba. So our most commonly performed vigor tests in Manitoba are the cold germination on cereals and the saturated cold germination for soybeans. We've, over the last 5 to 10 years, we've really become quite the little center for soybean growth here in Manitoba. So we deal with a lot of soybeans. So we often recommend that you use your germination and vigor results together, obviously. So germination tests, we examine the seedlings at a more advanced growth stage. So this helps us to determine if there's any abnormalities that the seedling is going to exhibit due to, say, chemical damage, frost, mechanical damage, and if there's any dormancy in that seed lot. And then a vigor test, because it's longer and it's under cold conditions, the seedlings don't grow out the way they do in the germination test, so we might not see those abnormalities in the vigor test. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So one of the recommendations we have is when you're testing your seed off the combine in the fall, please, if your vigor is low, please check it again before seeding. We actually recommend that you check your vigor twice at minimum, once in the fall and then once in the spring again before seeding, just to see if anything happened over the winter with storage. So vigor loss can be a result of multiple things. Again, physiological aging, so weather, harvest conditions, and processing. You're going to see that in the fall. And then storage over winter, the temperature it's stored at, the seed moisture, the humidity of the seed in storage. So it's always a good idea to get those things checked twice, and for sure before you're going to put it in the ground. Just a couple examples of what we see in germination tests. The first picture there in the white blotter is dormancy. I know a lot of seed growers or farmers like to just put their seed in the windowsill, and then they might see something like this and just assume that seed is dead. So we can read through that and see if it's actually in fact just dormant. Then one beside it, there's mechanical damage in peas, and then underneath there is frost, and then on the right is what we would see with chemical damage. So just on to some stats that we were seeing in Manitoba this is the 2019-2020 germination and vigor stats for across 6 different crop kinds. We collect our stats based on basically the seed's life cycle. So from August when it comes off the field to April when it goes back into the ground. So 2019, really the only issue we saw was soybean germ and vigors. This isn't really a great indicator, this chart, as to what we were seeing for germinations. but it's an overall view. And so those vigors were definitely lower in soybeans in 2019, 2020. So that we definitely stressed checking the vigor again in the spring before it went into the ground. But everything else overall looked okay. So the pea germination was a bit lower, but overall still above that 85% that you need for certified seed. So these are the stats that we're seeing right now. 2020, so to 2021 February. So this would be from August 2020 to February 2021. Again, we're not seeing any major catastrophes with in regards to seed quality. So don't have much to chat about with you guys today. It's staying pretty steady. We did notice a bit of dormancy in cereals, of course, but with vigor testing and with dormancy breaking methods, we were able to confirm that it was dormancy, and that in the spring, when your seed goes into the ground, those dormancy, that dormancy will be broken. So soybeans, again, lower vigor. It's pretty typical for soybeans from the fall. Most soybean growers will be checking we're starting to see samples start coming in for a cold germination to prepare for seeding. So we'll see that number probably rise in the next couple of months. So here's just an example of germin vigor for soybeans in Manitoba, and in September, if you notice, the vigor was a bit low. So that's just coming, those are our first initial harvest samples that we see. The vigor sometimes can be a little bit lower just due to those dormancy conditions when it comes off the combine. But germination has stayed quite steady. We do usually see, as what's expected, of 4 to 5% drop in germination due to cleaning. With soybeans, they can often be mechanically damaged. And then also they're color sorting a lot for soybeans. So that takes some of those green seeds out that may have still germinated, but they knock them out there with the color sorting. So here's some wheat information from August, September 2022 now currently. Wheats have been performing quite well. Germination is quite steady, which we love to see. Vigor it fluctuates a bit, but honestly, the numbers, nothing more than 10% between the two, which is a good thing to see. Again, we say vigor is more like how it's going to perform in the field and when it's planted in Manitoba. So seeing a nice steady vigor rate is a good indicator that's going to emerge well, and it's going to emerge evenly in the field, which is what we all want to see with our seed. And some barley numbers. Barley germinations took a bit of a hit in November. I wouldn't say that this is more indicative of what's going on with barley. I think that in November we just saw some poor seed come across, so some seed that may have been left for testing until the last minute because they weren't sure if they wanted to use it. Maybe it was later harvested or they had some issues with that. So, but overall, vigor with barley has been quite steady and quite high, which is nice to see. So we also did some statistics for disease testing. We have a fungal screen test that we do that tests for the first bunch of, I think there's 10 there, and then we have Ascochyta and then True Loose Smut on the end as well. But those first ones are in our fungal screen for cereals. So this was 2019, 2020. That Alternaria, we all know, is a scary number in a fungal screen, but easily controlled and not one of the more worrisome pathogens that we look for. Obviously, that first column, Fusarium head blight, Fusarium graminearum, that's the one that most everyone is curious about. With the loosening of the restrictions in Alberta, I guess, removal from the pest list. But in Manitoba, we test for, we just know it's here. So we don't have those regulations. So most everyone just tests for it anyway. And Saw some pretty nice low numbers in 2019, 1.5, not concerning. We had maybe 2017, 2016. I think we had some very concerning levels of fusariums. So it taught everyone that we really do need to check because it just depends on your harvest conditions and your field conditions. So, and then this is 2020 to current. So we are noticing in a higher number of the other fusarium species, other blights in seedlings. We don't separate them out, so I can't tell you which ones they are because there's numerous species in that grouping. So we are currently investigating the different ones that are causing the numbers to rise. And of course, then we're going to have a presentation about bacterial leaf streak in a little bit, so we'll learn a bit more about that. We don't test for that specifically either, but we are in the midst of researching that because there's been some concern in Manitoba with that, with bacterial leaf streaks. So it's just a list of the fungal screen cereals that we test, and then just kind of an explanation of the ones that are more concerning. So the first 5 that were listed, those are the ones that we're most concerned about. Low levels are not uncommon again, and then depending on your comfort with your seed lot and the percentage of infection, it might help you determine whether or not you're going to go forward with that seed lot or what seed treatment you're going to use. And then just the other ones that were of less concern, and then storage molds as well. In Manitoba, we've seen an increase in field pea acres. We've seen an increase in testing for Ascochyta disease on peas. Why does it matter? Yield loss. Why does any of the disease matter? It's yield loss. So just a couple indicators of what it looks like on a pea seedling for symptoms. Lesions on all plant parts, and they start as small flecks on the lower part of the plant and then enlarge under humid conditions. So those darn humid conditions, we know with fusarium infection, and it's the same with Ascochyta. If we have those humid conditions at certain growing stages, it often is a breeding ground for disease. So we have to keep a close eye on that. So as with all disease, planting clean disease-free seed is the safest method of control with Ascochyta. So testing your seed for these diseases, I think, is a pretty important part of your agronomy when you're choosing a seed lot. So that's basically all I have. Again, we didn't have a whole lot of catastrophes in Manitoba this year, so our seed quality has been quite steady, quite high, and that makes us very happy here. So yeah, I have questions that can be answered after the other 2 presentations. And if you don't want to ask the question here, you can always email myself here in Manitoba, or you can also email our client success manager, Rachel. She works out of the NISCU lab, and she'd be also happy to answer any questions you might have, and follow us on Twitter for some fun in-field pictures while we're out there in the field in the summer. So thank you.
Thanks, Shari. And as Shari mentioned, we'll do the Q&A after all 3 of the presentations. This is being recorded, and it will be on our website by next week sometime under the member resources page. And now we'd like to ask Holly Gelech with the 2020 Seed Labs to share her presentation for the Alberta update.
Hello and good day. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Most excellent. And the presentation is visible?
Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for the branches of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan seed growers for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to be going over a number of different items today, all related to Alberta. So I thought I would introduce myself. I've been in the seed testing industry for over 10 years, and I know I've collaborated with many of you, but there's other new growers out there that is first time seeing me. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Holly Gelech with SGS Canada. I'm located out of Sherwood Park, Alberta, a small mid-sized community just outside of Edmonton. And we operate in Edmonton as well as Grand Prairie seed testing laboratories. And my job is business development, client services, and front-forward facing presentations similar to this. So I grew up outside of Edmonton and was influenced by my father's contribution to farm gate value-added initiatives and international trade relations. He came from a pot farm, started his career in banking, and then finished his career working with Alberta farmers, with Alberta agriculture, and building out various programs and granting to expand operations beyond the farm gate. So in particular, processing and packaging. I went to the University of Alberta and received my plant science degree in 1994, and I built a career in the seed testing industry since then. My most recent interest is in the last 3 years, I developed a community garden in Strathcona County, which is in Sherwood Park. And currently I participate in Seeds Canada as a board member as well. I volunteered as a chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Steering Committee. So today I'm going to talk very much what Shari did, and our content is very similar. This is wonderful. I'm going to go through germination, disease, and cool stress testing, all related to Alberta. So my format of the presentation will be, really giving you the analytics behind our laboratory. So I will first go review the 5-year trend. Where are we based off of average results of a germination testing. I will then go into testing from the fall till now and outline really the lowest germination result in that crop type, as well as the highest result that we've had from the laboratory perspective. Then I'm introducing a very, a new measurement that we really haven't talked about in the past, but it is important. Averages, as Shari said, don't always give the entire picture. So I'm going to be talking about what's called the median. So when you think of, as an example, 1,000 wheat germinations that we may conduct in the course of the growing season, I'll be outlining the midpoint of those results based off of lining them all up from the lowest result to the highest result and picking that record number 500, the midpoint of it, because that does give some information and further contributes to the germination result. And then I'll also talk about any noteworthy comments for each of the crop species. So to begin with, we're going to start on a positive note on barley. All my presentations are of this format with the average germination starting from the dark gray on the left-hand side. This will be the 2016 crop year. Then the light gray is a 2017 crop year, followed by 2018, 2019, so 2019 last year, and then the current. So current, similar to Shari, is really from the fall, August timeframe when barley starts being harvested in the south part of our province, right up to currently to the data poll that I did the other day. The blue part of the chart is very interesting, as that is the 5-year average when we lump all of the data together. So again, when looking at the slide, do refer to the green bar here. So as a summary, 5-year trend, we're stellar. We have a 90.6% average in Alberta germination results. Fantastic. The lowest data point that we had was 14%. And we had many that did result in a 100% germination certificate, which is not entirely unique, but it's fantastic to see. The median point, so again, if say we're doing 500 barley germs and line up all the results from the lowest to the highest, the midpoint is 96%. So again, speaks continuously to the good quality. So it was really on account of great harvest conditions, right from late July in through into September. Well into September, we had dry, hot, warm conditions, which was fantastic. Oats on the other end, again, is above average. The result so far to date is 89%, which straight across the board, it's not the highest year. 2016 was the highest year on oat germinations, but again, we're following very close, well above the average, 8% higher than the average germination. Fantastic. Lowest result is 3%, with the highest at 100%, a medium of 95. All contributed to the fall conditions, less frost, minimal green seed, a very even crop. Now moving on to rye, less of a major crop in Alberta, but again, very still important. We were on par to a typical average year. The average germination is 87.5%, and what we are seeing this year is 87.9. So fantastic. This is really good to see. We're on par to average with the lowest result of 35%, highest of 98, and a medium point of 95%. Now we move to wheat. Other than canola, largest crop here in Alberta, and the 5-year trend is above average. The average of all the test results this year is 92.8% germination, lows of 13%, a high of 100%, and a medium of 95%. We did see some significant regional pockets with dormancy, and I'll speak to that a little bit later, as well as disease, primarily Fusarium species. When we look at the durum crop, top notch, 95% is the average germination, low of 13 and a high of 100. This very much speaks to using the median as a great tool to measure and outline what the actually seed quality is. So we look at median of 97%. Now there's nothing else that had a median that high. So if you think of it, that's the midpoint of all the results, fantastic. And primarily speaking to less Fusarium. Now moving on to bringing the lab to you, we want to be able to show you our lab. We've all been in somewhat of a lockdown for the last year, haven't been able to put lab tours, agronomists, seed growers through the lab in the last year, but we look forward to being able to open our doors and move to the digital age. The dormant seed is something that we do each and every year, as Shari indicated, have issues with. We start out in the fall seeing dormancy, typically in later September. The laboratory uses certain steps to break dormancy. The first step is to utilize cool chambers, chill chambers, for a duration of 3, 5, 7 days, depending on how much dormancy we're seeing in the lab. The next step is to add potassium nitrate, dormancy breaker, and then for very severe dormancy, which was exhibited in the 2019 crop, we utilized gibberellic acid. So when we talk about potassium nitrate and gibberellic acid, those are put within the water that the blotters are soaked in. So the real challenge from the laboratory is to distinguish between dormant seeds and dead seeds. So dormant seeds, similar to a couple kernels at the very bottom of the slide, you can see they're swelled. Water has been imbibed, but there's no radical emergence. There's nothing peeking out at all. Dead seeds tend to have, the embryo is blackened. When we take a knife and cut into the kernel, we open it up and we can see the embryo itself on the inside. And if it's blackened, we know it's dead. Next thing I'd like to talk about is Fusarium. We've been talking about it for so many years now, 20 years, but I did take this photo set here a number of years ago, and I thought it was really good to demonstrate how quickly Fusarium can take hold in a laboratory setting. So these are germination blotters of a very highly infected wheat sample that we pulled specifically off the shelf to demonstrate how quickly Fusarium can, start growing and multiplying on the blotter. So at day 2, that's the image on the left-hand side, you can see that the spores have been activated within the kernel. And that's on a result of the warm chamber temperatures of 20 degrees Celsius, plus the high humidity and moisture. And they have at day 2, they've broken. The hyphae is extending across the seed, killing the seed. And by day 3 in a germination test, the hyphae have now moved on to the following seedlings. So, it really speaks to the aggressiveness of the pathogen. And I, highly recommend when you receive a germination result that is on the low side and maybe even somewhat unexpected, I always recommend to look at all the details in the report of analysis. What's very important is the analyst comments. This will speak to what we're seeing in the lab. It's not always primary infection when we're talking about cereals. There will be additional information, and if you have any further questions, definitely give the lab a call. We do keep some photo documentation on significantly lower results, as well as we do have internal comments that we keep and can refer back to. Keeping in mind, a germination test is a destructive test. It's discarded at the end of the day. So we try to keep on file additional information for those conversations. Now moving on to the pulse category, jumping back to the similar slide format I have. This year, the average germination on beans, which I brought every bean together. I brought in faba, large acreage in the central part of the province. Beans, that's referred to soybeans, as well as the dry beans in the south. We see, above average conditions. Keep in mind the lowest result was 56 and the high is 99. With a median of 93. Do take note the faba bean average was 86% and the other beans in the classification were 91%. Moving on to lentil, small acreage, but great to talk about because this is another interesting thing to look at when we're talking medians. The low we had for germination was 29 and a high of 99, but look at the median. 98%, and that you kind of think, whoa, well, what's going on with the data? I need more information. Considering the average germination this year was 88% and the median 98. Well, looking further into data, we were able to dig in and see that majority of the results were very high, but there was a batch of samples that were quite low, bringing that average of 88% down. Peas tend to be very static. They don't change much. As you can see, the last 5 years, anywhere from 90.3% to 91.8%. They really don't move much at all. The lowest we received this year for a result was 6%, a high of 100%. I do want to make a comment on Ascochyta does not decrease the germination in a laboratory setting. It doesn't have an opportunity to grow, to flourish, and impact the germination result. Of course, it is very important though when speaking to introduction into the soil. Here's a picture of, similar to what was presented. Here's some symptoms that we see in the laboratory. The very top right-hand corner here, these are chemical damage. We typically don't see those from seed grower samples, more so from farmer producer. The seedling will be very stunted, very little presence of secondary root hairs. And again, on the left-hand side, this is what it should look like at the end of the 7-day test. Again, a lot of the abnormals in peas are as a result of detached cotyledons, and what that means is the 2 cotyledons are attached at one specific point, and as the cotyledons move back and forth, they start to detach from each other, not fully split yet, but they start to separate at the point of attachment. So things to consider. Now we'll move on to disease trends. So keeping in mind on germination, we are targeting the highest germination, and that's a good thing when you see a high result. For disease, we want to see the lowest result, and I'll go through severity, medium, and noteworthy comments. For barley, so what I want to speak to is this chart represents the fusarium incidence. So this is in particular the percentage of samples that are submitted to our lab that detect the pathogen. So that's important to understand. It's not that the average fusarium result for this year is 26%. My goodness, it is not. What we're demonstrating is what percentage of samples detect the pathogen. So this year, we did see a reduction in comparison to 2019. 2019 by far was the highest year that we've seen on record for Fusarium graminearum infection in the crop. This one is barley. We had the highest level of infection of 54.5%. This was very much an anomaly. We rarely see this higher result. I think it was something that was definitely outside of the data set, but I thought I'd introduce that. When I talk about medium, the medium result, really a typical result in Alberta is between 0.5% to 1%. So the test, plated test is a 200 seed test, so the lowest detectable level is 0.5%. Again, we continue as any other year to see infection common in the wetter zones. We need, with the disease triangle, the moisture, we need the host, and we need the pathogen present. With oats, exact same story. We are kind of midpoint in Fusarium graminearum. This year, 6% of the samples received to our lab detected the pathogen, down from last year, but still higher than the average in the 5 years. Our highest infection or severity was 3.5%. Good news story on oats, it continues to have a very low infection rate. It's typical to the crop type of the cereals. It's the least likely to have the infection of Fusarium graminearum. Wheat, our largest crop, follows exact same chart trend downward, as 29% of the samples that we tested this year detected Fusarium graminearum. Again, the infection levels are quite low, typically between 0.5 and 1.5%. But those wetter areas, those areas that receive constant moisture, and especially that July timeframe, we saw infection rates rise. The durum crop, this is where we can celebrate because we are well below the average. We are well below last year. So this was, again, speaks back to germination, which I outlined earlier, is that germination for durum was very high this year on account of lower Fusarium. So good news story here. I have my little icons here. It's a bucket of money because it's a good situation. So as we move forward from in Alberta, from the non-detect policy, which has now changed, to evaluating seed based still on Fusarium graminearum, but also the total Fusarium species, this is something to talk about. It's not as common in Alberta to conduct a total Fusarium species ID test. And this is a test that has 5 different pathogens, which I have listed here. They're all in the Fusarium category and are the 5 most commonly found in all of Western Canada. Each one contributes a little differently to, the end use market regarding vomitoxin and the other types of toxins that are in the grain. So you will be seeing more and more talk in the marketplace about Fusarium species, and this is a listing of what we would test in our total Fusarium species ID test. Then the full fungal scan, very similar to what Shari had presented, is that this is a full list of the fungal scans that we do in our laboratory. The groupings that are very important to understand are the ones that are surrounded by the orange box. Cochleobolus sativus is your root rots, Fusarium graminearum, as well as the rest of the Fusarium species. Each one of those can significantly impact the seedling emergence and therefore your yield at the end of the day. So those are the ones that keenly take a look at when you're reading your report. And the other 2 at the very bottom are storage fungi, Aspergillus and Penicillium. We saw huge spikes of them in the 2019 crop as we moved into January and February of last year. And that was because of the fall. The fall, there was continually snow, rain, frost, harvesting under unideal conditions. It was a really challenge. And of course, once you start getting storage molds, you can then cause heating in the bin, as well as you just cause seed germination reduction. Ascochyta, this is a bit of a, alarm the bells here because we are continually seeing a high percentage of samples that come to our lab to be infected with Ascochyta. This proves that in the last 2 years, 2019 and this past year, 79% of the samples that originate from Alberta are detecting the pathogen. So again, this is a real tough one. It's severe. and it is continually taking hold in Alberta. The highest result we released this year was a 29.5% infection. The median is a 1.5%, and a typical result would be 0.5% infection to 5%. So do consider it as a pathogen that is being introduced into the ground. Very important. That, and again, weather will dictate this, but it is becoming, quite a problem. Lentils, small acreage of lentils in the province, but anthracnose is still something to be very cautious of. This year we were, below average at 22% of the samples that were submitted to our lab had the infection present, but very low infection rates. Typical infection rate is 0.5% to 1%. Let's move on to the last pathogen in my list to talk about today, and that is true loose smut. One of the things that I always get questions on is, why is the true loose smut not included in the fungal scan? Well, quite frankly, we cannot test for it using a typical fungal screen. PDA, that's potato dextrose agar incubation, you just can't. We have to pull off the outer paleolemma, the outer hull of the barley, remove it out through lactic acid to get to the embryo, because the embryo is where the pathogen is present. That's where the mycelium exists and how we can identify it. So this plate here is an example of barley embryos that we have stained and we are ready to analyze. In typical grade table standards, is the maximum for untreated seed is 2% infection level. Again, that is untreated. There is a footnote at the bottom of the grade tables that does outline the procedure if it is greater than 2% and allowability for saleable product if treated with an approved fungicide for the pathogen. The highest severity we had this year was 6%. Moving on to the last grouping of tests I'm going to talk about is cool stress test. The difference between the tests, I want to show you some in particular wheat, what the different types of seedlings are, whether they're vigorous and non-vigorous, as well as benchmark targeting. So this is an example of a photo I took here this past fall. On the top of the pen, you have your wheat seedlings, and the bottom, your barley seedlings. To the left, we have a number of seedlings that we would classify as non-vigorous. So in a test, you will have vigorous seedlings, non-vigorous seedlings, as well as no growth. So no growth is pretty understandable. There's been, no radical emergence. There's been no sprouting whatsoever. And that really where the difference between non-vigorous and vigorous seedlings really speaks to the elongation and the development of the coleoptile leaf, as well as the root itself. So the seedlings on the left-hand side here would be classified as non-vigorous seedlings. They're just starting to peak out. You can see that they're just starting to germinate. These would be classified as non-vigorous. The seedlings here on the other side of the picture are considered vigorous seedlings. So difference between is the vigorous conducted at a low temperature between 5 and 7 degrees, from my understanding from most of the labs in Western Canada that offer the cool stress test, followed by a short period of time in the 20 degrees chamber to promote the elongation, while a germination test is standard 20 degrees Celsius, 7 full days. So very different growing conditions. And then, of course, the target differential is a maximum of 15% difference. I think ideally we're looking at a 10% would be the most ideal differential. We see a lot of samples that, are within that 5%, 1 to 5%. It's that differential that really needs to be explored further. So when I say explore further, is that I have these conversations typically when someone receives a low result, whether it's a germination, whether it's a cool stress test, on do you have reasons and why you think that the quality is subpar? And I typically go through this type of process, in that really the investigation starts in the field. What happened the last growing season? Was there disease? When did the moisture come? Was there a differentiation in staging? Did some of it sprout, germinate really early in the spring and another flush come a little later when moisture came? What were the harvest conditions? Was there frost? What was there rain? Was there snow? Some of the more delicate species, what was the combine speed? Fan settings, was it knocked around? Especially some of the oil seeds, such as flax, can get a lot of damage that way. What are the storage conditions and handling? When did seed go into the bin at a high moisture and sat there for 2 months before it was addressed with drying? What kind of drying temperature duration? This year I had a conversation on, I don't understand what happened. And, as we worked down the list, there was check marks that everything was the same until we got down to a new dryer. And then, it was a new dryer on site, and, believe that was the only thing that we could identify as something different than the past. And my last slide here is very much, for those new growers out there, is that, we continually talk about, when to test and, how to test. And here gives you the, the planning for the best seed, and starting in January, working through until the following December. There's a lot of activities that go on. We in January, February, March, we're doing a lot of clean seed testing, preparation for export, so APHIS documentation. Then we do recommend just prior to seeding, typically in the February, March timeframe, to do a germination retest. And Shari talked about a vigor test too, as well as if it was a poorer vigor in the fall. In the summer months, seed growers probably don't think much about seed testing, but it is something to consider. Additional training, such as grader training, ISTA sampler training. When are they available? Those are a great time to start thinking about it in the summer. Diagnoses of Aphanomyces, P's are going up. We already talked about Ascocutta being high. Okay, well, let's learn, do we have Aphanomyces as well in the field? Then moving on to July, thinking about bacterial or blight testing, which Mike Harding will be talking about here shortly, as well as in-field disease evaluation, very important. And then moving into the fall, where we do a preliminary testing for seed, as well as additional certification testing, that would be midge testing. And then moving on to the winter months of clean seed testing, carryover seed testing, and preparation for any export. So thank you very much for your time today. I can be reached at the phone numbers presented top of the screen here. I have a couple of our social media sites listed here, and I look forward to any questions in the upcoming sessions.
This is Jason here. Looks like we lost Lori. Great job, ladies.
Oh, goodness, sorry. I was on mute. I'm so sorry. I'm going to repeat what I said. I'm sorry. Thanks, Holly, for the presentation. And now we're going to have Jason, who's going to talk about the Saskatchewan story. And we really want to thank Jason and Discovery Seed Labs again for sponsoring this entire seminar today. So Jason, it's all yours.
Thank you. Just share a screen here. Excellent. That's visible and everyone can see me?
Yes.
And volume is coming through good?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you again for this opportunity. This is always an exciting time of year for testing labs. We get to come out of our hibernation and do what we do best. So yeah, what you'll see here is very similar to what was presented for Manitoba and Alberta. It looks like a pretty decent year. There are definitely some red flags, and then we'll go over those and kind of let you know what we're seeing in 2020. So germination and vigor, for the most part, really good in all cereals and pulses. We are seeing issues in oat though, likely caused by frost prior to harvest. But this is kind of the one that's taken the hit this year. Of course, everything can't be perfect or else we wouldn't be farming. So this is kind of the one that we're seeing some issues with in the cereal side. I'll go into a little more detail in the next couple slides, but also seeing some challenges with pulses. Probably a bit different of a problem here, likely due to the dry harvest conditions that a lot of the pulses were taken off of, and probably causing some micro cracking. So as we move closer to the secondary testing that happens in the spring, we're seeing some drop in germ and vigor. So it's a really important thing to start taking notice of, and ensure that you are testing that second time to catch any issues that might have happened over the winter storage. Overall, average disease levels look great. You are going to see some challenges in specific crop districts, especially more to the north, and more related to total fusarium. So probably leading to some issues around the harvest, but for the most part, compared to last year's, the average disease levels are looking really good. And then one note from the lab is that we are seeing some challenges of seed carried over from the 2019 year. Just, kind of throwing that out there in case guys do have some stored and we're planning on putting it in the ground. Thinking that it has to do with potential storage issues. So maybe some tough grain that went into a bin. Bin wasn't completely full, some challenges with the types of winters we've had where we're kind of cycling in and out of high and low temperatures, potentially causing some issues with older stored grain. So those are kind of the overviews that we're seeing in Saskatchewan. Just to dive in a little closer to wheat germs. Wheat looks great this year. Right? You can see our germ and vigor numbers are nice and tight. Less than 11% of those samples are below 85% germ, which is the target level that we look for when determining if a seed lot should move forward or another option should be found. So looking at the trends for the last number of years, it's definitely looking good for wheat. And like we said, for most cereals, except some challenges in oats. Durum was kind of the star this year. We saw a really great jump back to the 2018-2019 levels in both germ and vigor. Even looking at the number of samples that have come in below 85%, it's quite minimal. It's less than 5%. So things are looking quite good for that crop. And based on the punishment it took a year ago, it's nice to see those levels coming back. Barley, same thing as wheat. Again, really good numbers coming through. Great germ, great vigor. Those numbers are almost identical for averages for most of the samples, and only 16% of the total samples we've seen have had germs of less than 85%. This is the one of the cereals that we're kind of seeing some challenges with. Oat, again, suspecting that there might have been some frost in some areas where these samples are coming up a bit challenged. So mid 80s for germ, low 80s for vigor, and that window between the germ and vigor, like the past presenters described, is starting to get up there closer to that 10%. So that's not ideal. And it's something as we retest in the spring, we're seeing those numbers drop further. So 26% of the samples we're seeing are less than 85. So not a great year for oat. So something to definitely consider if you've got some seed sitting in a bin. Field peas, not bad. Again, a little less than 19 and 20, but as we're getting them retested, we're starting to see some challenges and likely due to the micro cracking. So something that you definitely want to retest before putting them into the ground, because as we're testing, those numbers seem to be dropping a little further. They started out great in the fall, but some storage issues likely caused by that dry harvest is resulting in a continual drop in those germ and vigor numbers. And we're starting to see that kind of target of 85% being challenged by 15% of those samples coming through. And again, the more we test, the more that kind of continues to drop. So heads up on peas. Not seeing as across the board in lentils, but again, the samples that we're seeing, there are some challenges, and as we continue to retest those samples, those numbers are dropping. So not to the same degree that they are in peas, but again, a heads up if you suspect that you had a pretty dry sample coming into the combine, it might have led to that micro cracking and then some challenges come springtime. Flax germ is looking really good, and germ and vigor are almost bang on. There are some samples out there that obviously aren't making that 85% germ, so 14% of those are what we're seeing, but for the most part, there's some really good flax samples out there, and should lead to a good start to the spring. Now, looking at disease, we tend to focus quite a bit on fusarium just because of Saskatchewan having an interesting history with that, and that disease kind of sets the trends for other diseases and other crops. We look at both data points on gram and total and base them out on crop district, because you do see quite a bit of fluctuation depending on the area, weather conditions, and what have you throughout the year. Just kind of as an overview, the south was pretty good. Gram numbers are quite low throughout, but as you move a little more north, you start to see some challenges within total fusarium, and there are some not great samples out there that we'll get to, but still a lot of good ones out there. Just make sure you're testing to determine which category you're fitting into. So if we look at Graminearum, starting in the south, you can see, again, numbers have been trending low, which is great, still there. And, sometimes where you do see, like in 2A, that 1.5%, which is quite a bit higher than any other crop district, that's mainly just kind of a sample bias. There wasn't a lot of samples that have requested that disease yet coming in. So that's just a few of what we've seen from that crop district, and they just happen to be a little bit higher than everyone else. But for the most part, the levels in the south are looking pretty good for gram. As we start moving a little more north, you're still seeing some really good numbers down from last year in terms of averages. So things are looking quite promising for that in those crop districts. And then even when you're further north, the numbers for gram are still pretty good. So that's just telling us, how good that growing season was related to disease. We'll see a bit of a different picture when it comes to total fusarium, and that usually is the result of some challenges that have happened closer to harvest with weather and disease incidents. So you can see based on ranges that we have when you're looking at total fusarium, they are starting to climb up a bit. We kind of do the 0 to 7, 7 to 14 scale, where 0 to 7 for total is pretty decent, not requiring a whole lot of attention to seed treatment. But once you start getting to that 7 to 14, you really want to think about putting on a really good seed treatment to avoid potential issues the following year. So you're starting to see in the south, there are some samples that those numbers are creeping up on total fusarium. And then as you start going more north, you start seeing those numbers increase more and more. And then finally in crop districts 8 and 9, there are some samples with some really elevated levels there. So something to really think about as you start moving closer to spring, that there are a ton of good samples out there, but just make sure that you're screening what you got so that there's no surprises. Perfect. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Jason. And again, I'm going to apologize. I've been telling everybody how to make sure you unmute when you talk, and I forgot that. So my apologies again for the dead silence earlier. Thanks so much, Jason. And now's the time that we'll answer some questions. You can either type them in the Q&A or you can raise your hand and we'll get to them. I know that we've got some questions up there already, 2 of them in the Q&A and 1 of them in the chat. So I'm very appreciative that Alyssa Chalmers and Jennifer Seward and Kelly Powers are helping us in the background to monitor all that. So go ahead.
Great, I guess I will start. I'm Alyssa Chalmers. We have 1 question that was answered, so I'll just voice it out for those who are on call. It was from Scott Keller. I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. Comment on risk of seed losing germ and / vigor by storing cleaned, untreated seed for 18 months. If you start with good quality, greater than 25% germ and vigor, is there much risk in losing quality by the 2nd spring? And it was answered by Shari. Thank you for the question. If you have stored seed for, if you stored seed of high germination and high vigor, and stored conditions are optimal and monitored, your risk of losing germ and vigor is low. Don't store treated seed. It's often recommended to move your seed at least once throughout the storage period and take a representative sample of a quality check. With that being said, is there anything that Holly and Jason want to add?
Oh, I believe that was really well answered. This is Holly here from SGS. You know, depending on the crop type is one thing that we continually see. Malt barley seems to be the one that tends to lose germination the quickest, the fastest, and sometimes unrealistically fast. The other crops, cereals, pulses, seem to be able to hold their germ over multi years, but you know, definitely must be tested each and every year. Germination can often stay quite strong, and then the vigor fall off before the germination does.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it was covered, but one piece of communication that we really like to share with growers is around storing seed in bins that are as full as possible. There seems to be, you know, kind of just like Holly does when we go through our list of questions to try and problem solve potential issues of why things didn't come through as expected. Sometimes the answer is that seed was stored in a bin that was kind of half full, and it just seems to leave a lot of room for condensation and issues that can kind of perpetuate a problem. So that's kind of the only thing that we could add other than what was already discussed.
Okay, thank you. It's Jennifer Seward. I'm going to read the 2nd question or 3rd, I'm not sure which one we're at now. And any of you can answer this from the labs. Do any of the seed labs perform the edible bean disease and blight dome testing?
Discovery Seed Labs is able to, yeah.
Holly here from SGS, Sherwood Park. We typically don't do the blight dome test. We can do a typical bean fungal scan, you know, which could cover any of the species that we typically do in a pulse scan.
Yeah, hi, it's Shari here from the 2020 Seed Labs. We also do not offer the dome test at this time, but we will do a full fungal screen on for the rest.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. This is Kelly Chambers from Alberta Seed Growers Association. I've got the next question up, and to all of our presenters. I have a question. Is there an industry-wide accepted vigor test now?
Hi there, Holly from SGS speaking. No, there is no test that is an industry-wide vigor test. There's multiple vigor tests that are in the marketplace, whether they originate from the ISTAS organization, AUSA, which is the American, or individually developed by a proprietary process within laboratories. I would say the majority of the vigor testing done in Western Canada is really dealing with, what the biggest stress is for getting seedlings quick up out of the ground and ready to roll, and that is the cool conditions. And that's, the reason most of the laboratories are using some type of stress always related to cool. There is my understanding, slight differentiations in temperatures and durations, but there is no industry-wide accreditation firm. We are accredited as seed laboratories for any test under the grade tables in order to seal pedigreed seeds. So the validation has been done by CFIA, and the 3 tests are physical purity or mechanical purity, as others refer to it as, germination, and true loose smut. So those are the 3 tests that are accredited through CFIA, and CFIA would not have the appetite to follow down the path of adding additional testing procedures for that, as it is not under the grade tables and under their mandate.
Yeah, great answer. I know we've worked with a number of groups to try and develop one, so that is still ongoing. Something that would kind of just be adopted by groups in the industry. So there is work going on to try and come up with that protocol, but it's being done by like SaskAg and other groups like that, just because they know the concerns of growers out there. But yeah, I don't think the protocols everyone is using is far off. It's just the way we need to address vigor in Western Canada is kind of unique compared to what other parts of the world have to do with it. So it makes it tough to perform that in an adapted protocol that is done by other groups. But I know there are individuals working on it, and we've been requested to kind of be involved in the development of it, which I'm sure all the other labs have been as well. So we're working on it, but it'll be something that is more adopted by the groups involved as opposed to something coming from CFIA.
Okay, the reason I asked, actually that was my question, Jennifer Seward here, is simply because it's referred to in the seed regulatory modernization needs assessment survey. So it might be something that might become more important down the road. Anyway, that's just my comment.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. And under, Seeds Canada, there is a seed testing and quality assurance committee that has been developed, and who knows, it may be something that is brought to the table there.
There was, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, the one question that we have left is there any chance, it's from Nicole, by the way, is there any chance of these presentations to be made available to us or for recording to be posted? I tried to write down all the information I need, but I think I missed some. And to answer that, we said prior to that it's being recorded and that it will be on our website. It will take a few weeks though. Lori, do you want anything else to add to that?
If you're looking specifically for the presentations only, then just give me a shout and I'll get the permission from the presenters, and then I can forward their PowerPoint presentation to whoever is interested. Does that work for the presenters?
Hi, yeah, it's Shari from 2020. Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, great. All right, seeing no further questions, we'd like to move on then to the other presentation from my, excuse me. Sorry, Now, as I've mentioned before, we're very, very pleased that Discovery Seed Labs has sponsored this entire seminar today. And so now I welcome Jason to give us an overview of their company and their contribution to our industry. So Jason, you've got the floor again.
Thank you. Great. You know what? We'll try and make up a little bit of time here. I won't take too long. Just kind of what we wanted to cover was just some of the other tests that we're offering. We just think that there's a tremendous amount of value in what we're going to cover here, and it's a little outside of traditional seed testing, but yet at the same time, I think it's really important for growers to utilize the labs in their provinces to look at these tests that we're about to kind of quickly go through and present. First one is really top of mind for Alberta and now Saskatchewan. Discovery Seed Labs has been very fortunate to work with the Sask Ministry to develop the survey in Saskatchewan related to clubroot. It's definitely a growing concern. If you look at the new map, you're starting to see some different fields coming up even in the south that are testing positive for this interesting disease. So just again, wanted to remind the growers that it definitely is something that they need to be aware of. Early detection is kind of the key for this. And there's a huge difference in your management strategies if you find it in your field early versus pretending it's not there and having the population of spores build up. So.
Oh, sorry, Jason. I had taken your screen share off to show mine, so I don't know if I've cut your screen share off. I apologize.
No worries. Thank you for the heads up. Let me, but yeah, no, just kind of wanted to mention clubroot again. This is the latest survey that has just been published, and you can start to see some fields kind of creeping up in the south. So it's something that, I would definitely recommend being done. And the nice part about it too is if you contact Sask Ministries or Sask Canola, you can actually get sample bags from them for free, and they'll cover the cost of a lot of the tests. So there's really no excuse not to take advantage of that and work towards making that a part of your annual farming practices. The other one that we've recently been working with Agriculture Canada on and licensed the technology is the race ID markers for blackleg. So I know this is where the industry is moving related to canola, and the breeding companies working to identify which specific races their breeding material is resistant to. And with these tools, there's some really interesting technology that can be used so that your fields can be screened to determine which races are present, and then you can match that with the resistance in the canola line. So again, this is a pretty unique opportunity. We wish every disease had this type of technology related to it, so that you could determine what potential issues exist in your field, and then move forward to find those canola varieties that can address those specific races. So pretty cool technology. Yeah, really, I think most of the labs are offering it now, but it's something that we really believe should be utilized a lot more. And as the breeding companies kind of build that more into their offering, you'll see a really great synergy between that testing tool and those canola varieties that are available to your farm. Third one is a little newer for Discovery Seed Labs. We've been offering a sclerotinia test on an agar plate method for a very long time. However, we've now moved that over to the use of molecular technology, so we can really decrease the turnaround time from when the samples are received to when the results are presented. So we're looking at about 24 to 48 hours of turnaround time, which really helps make a decision when it comes to spraying for sclerotinia. We've also done some work to not only utilize the detection of the spores on the canola petals, but also working in crop density and weather to help make a better prediction model. So we've got a calculator on our website. When you order a kit from us, we send it out to you. You go through, follow the protocols, send it back into us in 24 to 48 hours. Depending on when we receive it, we will have the results out to you. You can come to the calculator and punch in the percent infection of canola petals, your predicted crop density, and then the weather pattern that you've seen during flowering. And then that gives you a pretty predictable score of not only your probable percent disease in the crop, but also percent yield loss, which kind of helps you determine your economic threshold when it comes to the spraying. So really excited about this. We will have a limited amount of kits each year that we do sell, so that we can ensure that turnaround time is always met. So if it's something you're interested, please contact us sooner than later to get those kits in your hands. And then the last thing we're kind of working on, which is really relevant to the next talk, and we're actually working to help validate our markers with the Alberta Ag, is a bacterial leaf streak. So we're getting a lot of calls around it. There's obviously a lot of discussion happening, and it's something that we're moving forward to provide as a screening service for our customers. So our molecular markers are developed. We're just waiting on the samples to confirm that they're specific to the disease itself, and then we'll be having this available when requested. So that's just kind of the oversight of what we've been working on at Discovery. We kind of continually keep bringing in new assays as demand requires and as our customers request them. So just wanted to share that with you, and really looking forward to the next talk to continue to learn more about bacterial leaf streak and where it's going to be heading, and what we're going to be needing to stay on top of it. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Jason and Discovery Seed Labs for sponsoring this seminar. And as Jason referenced, our next speaker is Mike Harding. Okay, Jason, we're going to stop your share screen, and we will have Mike share his screen. Mike Harding has received his PhD in plant pathology at the University of Arizona. He's with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. He's been with them for 16 years, 9 years as the provincial plant pathologist. And his work includes crop disease monitoring, surveillance, and diagnostics. Thank you very much, Mike, for helping us today with this Seed Talk series seminar. And I'll give you the floor. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Question one, can you hear me?
Barely.
Can you hear me a little better now?
Nope.
Okay. Let me. Does that help? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my presentation screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So my pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed the presentations and learned quite a bit about the situation last year. So thank you for the invitation. I'm gonna just hit the highlights here with bacterial leaf streak. I'm not gonna go into tons of detail, but certainly you can email or call me if you have further questions, or perhaps there'll be time for questions at the end. I want to acknowledge the people here as co-authors on this presentation who have either helped with putting some of this information together and who are kind of picking up the torch and running with more research and assistance to help us get some things figured out here with respect to this emerging issue we have in our cereal production in Western Canada. So I'm going to cover three things today. First is we'll just talk about what is this pathogen and the disease it causes. Then we'll talk about the situation in Western Canada that we know of so far, and then finish off talking about some basic information about what we know about the organism and how it's been dealt with in other places, what we might do to manage the problem. Okay, so in this slide, I'm showing you some bacterial leaf streak symptoms, and I've got a red circle around the a leaf here that has some symptoms that are just beginning to show up here. And in this second red circle, I'm showing you some bacterial leaf streak symptoms that have progressed a little further. And so you can see in that top circle, you just see these small kind of chlorotic streaks moving parallel with the veins of the leaf. And sometimes if the humidity is really high, they'll appear water soaked, and you'll actually even sometimes see bacterial ooze coming out onto the leaf. And then as it progresses, you can see the lesions expand, they become necrotic. And then in this final circle here down in the lower left corner of the screen, you can see that the leaves eventually just get crispy and they die. And so the photosynthetic potential of these leaves basically comes to an end. So here are some additional symptoms. Again, you can see this streaking, these longitudinal lesions occurring on the leaves. And then in this photograph in the right, you can see this long streak here, but you can also see that in this crop, there's probably a fungal disease occurring with the bacterial leaf streak, and it's probably tan spot. And so you can see fungal lesions and you can see this long stripe. And so lots of times it's easy to misdiagnose the problem because it usually doesn't just occur in isolation. There's oftentimes other fungal diseases that can sometimes make it challenging to know whether bacterial leaf streak is present. And in a lot of cases, bacterial leaf streak is present with other fungal diseases as well. So what we know about the organism is that it infects all of our cultivated cereals, small grain cereals. It also can infect native and weedy grass species and also cultivated forage grasses. So just about any grassy cultivated or wild species of grass can be a host. Wheat is probably the most susceptible of our cultivated cereals, but it depends on the pathovar of the bacterium that's present. And right now the pathovar we have present can affect, at least the one that we've confirmed, it can cause disease on both wheat and barley. And it's pretty equally aggressive on both, but wheat maybe being a little more susceptible. Now, one of the other things we know about this pathogen is that it likes areas that have moisture available. So bacteria don't do well in dry conditions. And it also likes areas that have warm days and cool nights. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's adapted to grow in those conditions. But the second is that those conditions often lead to a lot of dew formation. And that obviously helps the bacterium to grow and multiply when there's water distilling on the leaves. So as a result of this, the disease is present in areas like the southern prairies, so irrigated temperate climates, or high rainfall subtropical highlands, so areas in the tropics that are high up, that have the cooler nights. this is the distribution of the pathogen across the world. You can see the Prairie provinces represented there and some other places in Canada where it's been identified. But you can see that, you know, just about everywhere that we grow cereal crops in a big way, this pathogen is present. And what's the impact? I mentioned that you lose the photosynthetic capacity of the leaf as it becomes either full of lesions or just desiccated. But the pathogen also is, you know, taking energy from the host. That's what pathogens do. And so that reduces the ability of the host to, you know, have high yield. One of the things that's been learned very recently in some of the research that's been done is that this pathogen actually kind of takes over the synthesis of one of the plant hormones, abscisic acid. And so this can drastically affect the ability of the plant to grow and develop normally. And we've heard sort of confirmed reports of yield loss of up to 40% in the US and Mexico. And anecdotally, we're hearing in Alberta and Manitoba, similar numbers, you know, in the isolated fields that the disease becomes quite problematic. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you just a little bit of a history of what, you know, where we've come from. So, and then finish off with letting you know kind of where we're at with this situation of this bacterial leaf streak disease on the prairies. And I wanted to point out one other thing before I jump into these situations about the biology of the pathogen. So bacterial leaf streak is caused by Xanthomonas translucens undulosa. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later here. Bacterial leaf spot or bacterial blight on wheat is caused by a different pathogen called Pseudomonas. And it's important not to get the two mixed up because bacterial blight, we've never ever seen it cause 40 to 50% yield loss in wheat. It's usually just a curiosity and, oh, there's a little bit of bacterial leaf blight. It's usually not an issue. But bacterial leaf streak has in some areas of the prairies become a real significant production impediment. And it's caused by the Xanthomonas species, and the disease is called leaf streak. So the Pseudomonas leaf spot or leaf blight is not the same thing. Okay, I'm going to start with Manitoba. And because I'm not a plant pathologist in Manitoba, I relied on some other folks to get this information that I included as co-authors on the presentation. And what they told me was that the diagnostic lab in Manitoba in 2020 evaluated 9 wheat samples that had bacterial symptoms, bacterial disease symptoms, and one of them tested positive for bacterial leaf streak. So the official confirmed cases, there was one confirmed case. However, there were lots of other anecdotal reports in 2020. And the word I got was that this started showing up, and there was a lot of chatter going on Twitter and, you know, among agronomists and growers saying, what is this? And it kind of got misdiagnosed as tan spot or, you know, a fungal leaf disease. And it became clear that that was not the case because fungicides were totally ineffective at managing it. They also found that the geography was quite limited. And I'm going to show you in the next slide the weather conditions that probably had something to do with that. And the other thing coming out of Manitoba was that a lot of the reports of, you know, real serious cases of leaf streak were reported on AAC Viewfield. Now, we're not going to jump to any conclusions about Viewfield, and I'm going to talk about this later on in the talk, but this is just what was, I'm just relaying to you what was reported. I think it's important we don't jump to conclusions based on anecdotal reports. Okay, so here's the map of the weather situation in Manitoba. And from left to right, you see the May precipitation, middle is June, and on the right, July. And those dark blue areas are showing, you know, a percent of normal being, you know, higher, up to 100, even to 300% higher than normal for that area. So this is the area of Manitoba that reported the most bacterial leaf streak, and probably for a couple of reasons. One is the pathogen was present, there were susceptible hosts there, and then these weather conditions can really drive the disease in 2 ways. One is the moisture that's required for the bacteria to grow, and the second is that if some of these were thunderstorms or even light hail or hailstorms, These can blow the bacteria from field to field and cause wounds that make the bacteria even more able to easily get in and start causing disease. So these conditions certainly would have driven the possibility of a bacterial leaf streak epidemic. Now moving over to Saskatchewan. So real similar story here with one exception. Again, the Saskatchewan Crop Protection Lab had one case of what they're calling bacterial leaf streak on wheat. Now, this wasn't necessarily confirmed, like a molecular test confirmed, but the symptoms were consistent with bacterial leaf streak, and it showed bacterial streaming coming out of the leaves. So it's very, very likely bacterial leaf streak. So one sort of confirmed report, and then other anecdotal reports. Now, and similar to Manitoba, originally kind of misdiagnosed and wondering what it was, and then eventually figuring out that it was bacterial leaf streak. So I'll give you one producer's example that he shared with me. So in 2019, it was pretty dry in the area that this producer farmed in Saskatchewan. They only had about 4.5 inches of rain, but they actually saw symptoms of bacterial leaf streak up against a grassy slough that bordered the field. And so in some areas where there was a high moisture microclimate, it did show up just in really sort of isolated patches restricted to those microclimates. It was showing up on multiple cultivars of wheat and kind of all over the place, but nobody really took note of it. Kind of similar to the way we look at bacterial leaf spot or bacterial blight. Oh, there's a little bit of bacteria. That's interesting, move on. Then in 2020, there were some more serious cases of the disease. And again, in pockets, depending on where the weather was conducive and where all three sides of the disease triangle were coming together. So the one difference is that Saskatchewan, I never heard of any reports of significant yield loss. We can speculate that there's this up to 50% yield loss, but that situation was really sort of more confirmed in Alberta and Manitoba. So this is kind of a speculated situation. I could not find any Saskatchewan weather maps. So I can't, I'm sorry, I don't know where you find those. And I looked, but wasn't successful. So I can't tell you much about the Saskatchewan weather condition in 2020. So I'm jumping now to the Alberta situation. So in 2013, we saw bacterial leaf streak, and it was in one field. We didn't take, again, oh, that's really interesting. What a kind of unusual situation. But then in 2017 and 2018, we started seeing multiple fields, like half a dozen fields in southern Alberta, all under irrigation, a few of which were experiencing 20 to 30% yield loss due to bacterial leaf streak. So we really stood up and took note at that point. We isolated the pathogen, we sent it, and believe me, this was for lots of reasons I won't go into, it was a really complicated, long road to getting this thing identified and confirmed, but we did find that it is Xanthomonas translucens, and the pathovar is undulosa. This pathovar is pathogenic on both wheat and barley. Now, there are 5 or 6 other pathovars that have different host range. So they would attack grasses or barley only, or rye and triticale, etc. So it's the taxonomy and the host range when you get to the pathovar level is really challenging. And so I'm not going to take more time to talk about that, but I will tell you that in 2019 and 20, it got worse. And so there were 8 confirmed fields in 2019, and then in 2020, dozens of fields that I'm calling them anecdotal reports, but we actually had over a dozen fields where a sample was sent to us and we confirmed that there was bacterial streaming coming out of those lesions, which really gives us a highly suspicious confirmation for bacterial leaf streak. Now, in Alberta, we also were primarily getting this on view field, and there were some other varieties that, in a field adjacent that we weren't seeing it in. And there was also some evidence that this came from, a particular seed source. I want to make this really, really clear. If anybody tells you that view field is the problem, or that seed transmission is for sure the way this is spreading around. I want to see some evidence of that. There's circumstantial evidence that that's what's happening, but all of the science-based investigations I've done indicate that there's nothing about view field that makes it more susceptible, and the pathogen can exist in the grasses around fields just as easily as it can on seed. So we still have some work to do to confirm this, but based on what's known in other areas that have had this problem longer than we have, seed transmission is one of the most important ways that the disease moves around. So we suspect that's what's happening. There is some circumstantial evidence pointing to that being the case, but if anybody's confirmed this, definitively, I haven't seen those results yet. And as far as I know, my lab has been the only one working on this over the last 2 years in Canada. So thankfully that's changing, and we're going to get some better answers here as we move forward. But I don't think we should jump to too many conclusions yet about these early anecdotal reports that we've got. Okay, so in Alberta in 2020, let's look and focus down here on this map on the left in southern Alberta, where most of the reports of bacterial leaf streak came from. And again, this is where I live, right here, okay, near Brooks, Alberta. That's a pink area, which means it's the wettest. It's a once every 50 years kind of wetness situation. And, probably for sure more than 90% of the fields that we had tested and were positive for bacterial leaf streak came in this zone between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. So in May, there was this wettest of all time occurring. And then in June, sorry, this is May 10th to June 8th precipitation. And then this map on the right shows June 14th to July 13th. Again, we're still really, really wet in this area here. And a lot of the rainfall that came were like hard wind driven rain in thunderstorm systems and some hailstorms. So it's like the best case scenario for bacterial leaf streak to show up is in a year like 2020 in southern Alberta. We've got warm days and cool nights. For example, last year in July, we had an overnight temperature of about 4 degrees. And again, so because of our situation close to the mountains, we sometimes get very, very cool air coming and cool us off pretty significantly in the evenings. And so lots of rainfall, lots of dew, and just optimal conditions for the bacterium to get going. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is that, so we isolated the causal agent, we confirmed it's Xanthomonas translucens, and then we did a host range evaluation with the following wheat varieties and 1 barley variety. And because we wanted to know if it was a view field issue, or were some cultivars more tolerant of this than others, or was view field ultra susceptible? What's going on here? And it was pretty much equally virulent on everything that we tested it on. Now, keep in mind, this was kind of a skunk works experiment. It was a quick and dirty look by just taking the bacterium in culture, spraying it onto plants, and then looking at the results. This wasn't replicated, we didn't do statistics, and we didn't repeat it. So this isn't a scientific study that we would publish. It was just a quick look and see. But based on those data, we don't think this is a specific variety issue. We think it's just cases where all 3 sides of the disease triangle are coming together. And whether it's being spread by storm systems, or it's just always existed at very, very low levels in some of our grassy areas, or whether it's moved around on seed, we think probably all of the above are happening, and that this is just an emerging pathogen. The conditions are right for this to become really problematic, and the US has seen that, a few years in advance of us, and now it's found its way into our cereal production systems in Canada. And based on what's happened in the US, will probably be an issue that we'll have to deal with in the long term. I hope it proves me wrong, but I don't think it's going away. Okay, so last question I wanted to address in this talk is, how are we going to manage this? Thankfully, there's been, because this has been an emerging issue in the United States over the last 5 years, they're quite a bit further ahead of us looking at how to do this. So we've learned a lot from our American neighbors, but we still have some work to do in Canada. And in order for us to manage, we really have to understand the biology of how this organism, we need to know its game plan so that we know how to play defense against it. So this is the game plan of the bacterium. And I'm going to start right down here with the overwintering part. So it either overwinters in crop debris, perennial weeds, or just native grasses, or it can survive on seed. And so when it's there and the weather is conducive, meaning 15 to 30 degrees and lots of moisture, the bacteria are going to multiply, they'll be released and splashed around, they'll get onto host plants that are growing in the spring, and then they penetrate the plant and they'll start to form those first visible streaks that I showed you in my introductory slide. And then the bacteria multiplies. If the weather's right and there's moisture, the bacteria will multiply, and they can multiply pretty fast. And then they'll splash around and infect more leaves. They can even get up onto the head and cause a disease called black chaff, which is like a gloom blotch. And that's how they get onto the seed and become, and the grain or the seed becomes infected. Excuse me. Pardon me. So then the disease can be spread in the field through rain splash and wind-driven rain or exudates being blown around. And it can even be spread long distances in like major thunderstorm systems that really pick up a lot of debris and dirt and bacteria and move them around. And then later on in the season, the bacteria kind of go dormant, but they'll survive in crop debris in the field. They can survive in soil a little bit, but mostly in crop debris or on grain or seed or on perennial weeds. Okay, so this is the pathogen's game plan. Let's look at some key points here. Okay, it can survive and move around on seed. That's a big one. And so we need to be prepared to deal with that. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about how we might do that. The bacterium can survive in soil, but it survives poorly. So, you know, if you have a decent crop rotation, bacteria in the soil aren't going to be your problem. However, if you have a short rotation and you have infested crop residues when you bring the next host crop in, that could be a problem. Or if you have volunteers or weedy grasses, or even just grasses bordering your field, it can survive there. We know that moisture is a critical factor. So nobody hopes for a drought, but droughty conditions can help really push this pathogen back. It'll grow with temperatures between 15 and 30 degrees when there's abundant moisture. And it's really important to keep this in mind. Bacteria double their population size every day. So every 18 to 24 hours, the population doubles. So you could imagine in a week how, you know, let's say you had 50,000 bacterial cells in your quarter section, you know, in a week, that's going to be an awful lot more because the population is going to double so quickly. And so this is a polycyclic disease. It produces more bacteria multiple times throughout the growing season. As a result of this, well, first of all, I'll just point out this last point here. Fungicides don't work. Bacteria's metabolism is different than fungi, and so the fungicides are ineffective. And there are bactericides that could probably get an emergency use registration, but the work that's been done in the United States just shows that because this generation time is so short, that you have to reapply these bactericides, you know, on a 7 to 10 day schedule throughout the whole growing season to prevent, you know, the situation from becoming like this. So it's just not economical to manage them with bactericides. So if I was going to give recommendations for growers today, there's only really a few things that they can do. One is scout your crop and keep good records. So know where this shows up and know which harvested grain might have bacterial leaf streak hiding in it. Because if you're going to use stored grain as seed, you want to know if it's there. And right now, that's really the only way to know is by keeping records. Seed testing is on its way, and it has kind of begun here. So that's going to be an option that we need in the future. And staying as clean as we can from the start is going to be a really key piece to managing this disease. So really it's avoidance that we want, because we just don't have a lot of management options. We'll use host resistance if it becomes available. And we may get some help, you know, some incremental help with seed treatments if they become available, but there isn't anywhere in the world that solved the bacterial leaf streak issue with either of these two tools. They've got some help, some incremental support for management, but hasn't solved it. So we're really going to have to rely on clean seed programs to help manage this disease, along with crop rotation. Okay, so for the future, what do we do? Like I said, we watch, we scout for it. We know we need to learn how to recognize it. This is a new one for most people, and so it gets misdiagnosed a lot. So learn how to recognize it, learn where you can get diagnostic support if you're suspicious that you have an issue, and start as clean as you can. So we need to work on a seed testing standard, or at least a method, and use that as sort of a foundational pillar for clean seed programs, at least programs that can help us understand the risks associated with a certain seed lot. So like was pointed out, we don't necessarily need to say, you know, if it has some bacterial leaf streak detected, then you can't use it. I don't know that that's going to be reasonable, depending on how this epidemic plays out over the long term. But at least a seed testing program or standard that helps us evaluate the risk associated with a certain seed lot, so that a grower goes into it with their eyes open, knowing whether it's a low risk situation or a high risk situation. Hopefully in the future, we'll get some tolerance or, you know, partial resistance brought into our elite lines. There's maybe some potential for seed treatments to help us out here. Right now, that's not an option, but some further work might help that. And lastly, crop rotation isn't going to solve the problem 100%. So that's why I've got a question mark. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't rotate. You should always practice a good, long, diverse crop rotation to the best of the ability on the farm unit for lots of reasons. Bacterial leaf streak is just another one on the list. So we're not going to manage it with crop rotation, but it's going to help provide a nice, stable foundation that isn't going to have surprises that are going to jump out at us. Okay, so that's really sort of, I guess, what I wanted to cover here. Again, like I said, there's lots more we could talk about, but in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. And then if there's time to do any questions, then we can do that. And I'll say thank you again very much for the invitation. And I hope that the information was useful.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate your presentation, and thanks again so much for reaching out to Manitoba and Saskatchewan and incorporating that information into your presentation. Much appreciated. Just looking, the Q&A session is open now, so if you have some questions, you want to raise your hand or type them into the Q&A, feel free. Jason, I think there was one earlier. Did you want to address that one? Read it and give your response?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was related to pathovar and BLS. So yeah, question was, will bacterial leaf streak that Discovery Seed Labs is offering able to determine the pathovars? And yeah, we are definitely, just like Mike shared with us, we are focusing on the what we've been told is the pathovar that is causing the damage. So as more information is brought forward towards this, then we'll definitely shift as the experts kind of tell us what we should be targeting. But yeah, for right now, we're definitely, our markers are specific to the pathovar unduloso. So that's what we're focusing on. Is as more information comes in, we'll be able to adapt. But for now, that's our target.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, it looks like there's sort of a follow-up as to when we might see a test for seed from Dawn in the Q&A. Do you have a timeline yet, Jason?
Hopefully in the next coming months, if all goes well. Mike's group was extremely generous with us to provide us the controls we need. So, you know, kind of as soon as that testing is confirmed and we have confidence around the specificity of the markers we've developed, then we'll be able to provide it commercially. So I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but we're hoping that all goes well, and in the next few months we'll have something that we can share with everybody. But again, this is new, so we don't want to be overly optimistic, but fingers crossed that we'll have something shortly.
Can I chime in on this? It's Mike here.
Of course.
Awesome, thank you. One thing to keep in mind, and I didn't go into this in the presentation just because I've noticed people's eyes glaze over when I do, but it's really important to understand that we don't even really understand the taxonomy of this bacterium very well. It's only just been in the last 2 years that we've resolved, you know, even what its name is. And that might not seem like a big deal, but just imagine as a seed grower, if you couldn't tell your customers what cultivar you were giving them, if it was, you know, it's pretty important to have a name for something, because then we kind of understand what it is. We know what to expect. Like with a certain variety, we understand the yield potential, the disease package, etc. When organisms don't have their taxonomy fully resolved, we don't know their host range. We don't know how to detect them. We're kind of shooting in the dark. And because this has never been a real production issue, nobody's really worked on it. And so we're getting the answers and it's getting better, but you know, the seed labs are in a tough spot here. The testing labs are in a tough spot because we just don't have the tools really that we need. So we have to build them. And so there is a diagnostic molecular test that can tell you if it's Xanthomonas translucens. And then there's a LAMP assay that can, you know, you run an assay with 5 different sets of LAMP primers, and then you have this complicated matrix that you use to understand whether it's this pathovar or that one. So it's not easy to do, but it can be done. And so that's the good news, is that we're working on it and hopefully get there soon. And the last thing I want to say is, if there's other folks out there that are interested in, you know, we have to be really careful that when someone asks for an isolate, that we confirm and make sure that we're sending them the right thing so that they can get the work done with confidence. And even that is something that we're still challenged with. But if there are other groups out there trying to develop tests and they would like, you know, isolates that we have, or assistance from the Alberta Plant Health Lab, who's also developing some testing methodology, we'll be happy to share what we can.
Thanks, Mike. It's Kelly Chambers here from Alberta Seed Growers. Appreciate the information and even more so appreciate the offer to work with the industry. That's how change takes place. I guess I have a question, and it sort of builds on what you just stated, because that information hadn't come out yet in this presentation. Are you aware of any plant breeders that are already doing work to develop resistance to this particular bacteria? And I suspect the answer may be no. And certainly if there's anyone else in on the call from an industry perspective that is aware of this, please chime in.
So it's Mike here. I'm not really in the loop on, what the breeders are up to. So, but my understanding is that nobody's been working on this. If they have been, it's only just been in the last year or two. I'm not even aware of anywhere that we sort of have disease nurseries where we could even test for this in the field. So I don't think so, but hopefully someone else maybe that's plugged into that network of breeding can give a better answer.
We do see a hand raised by Maria Felitas. So I'm going to unmute you. And don't forget to unmute yourself, Maria.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, everyone. So thank you for inviting me. I have requested Mike to participate to this presentation. And I do know that some people at the University of Saskatchewan are working with some sort of resistance in their breeding program. There are also a number of sources of resistance that has been reported in some Mexico investigation. Like I do know Pavon 76, a cultivar that has some source of resistance, some resistant genes against bacterial leaf streak. And I do know that, and this is like an informal information, but I know someone that works in the breeding program at the university, and they are looking for source of resistance to this disease.
Great, thanks, Maria.
You're welcome.
I'll wait a second. I see something going on in the chat, so we'll see if that comes forward as a question. In the meantime, thanks so much, Mike, for your presentation. And thanks also to Shari, Holly, and Jason for helping us with this seminar today. And what I'm going to do is share my screen again. So thanks again for all the presentations, very valuable information. As I mentioned, the recording will be up on our website, and anybody that wants the presentations can get a hold of me and we can sort that out. We want to talk about our upcoming series on Thursday, March the 11th will be Seed Growing 102. That's going to be presented by Bayer Seed Growth. We're going to have tips and tricks from some experienced growers in Saskatchewan. That's going to be Alan Altwasser. And from Alberta, we're going to have Ward Oatway. And some ideas about what your licensed seed crop inspector wants you to know when they're going out to do inspections that will help both you and them. And that will be Liddell Olson and Amelia Hamilton. And then a little bit of a succession planning as a seed grower, like, are you prepared? So Gail Harris is going to talk about plot accreditation, who has that? Does everybody in your entity understand who can do plots, who can't, that sort of a thing. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to do a demonstration of our interactive seed guide. Then on Thursday, March the 25th, this is a change. It's being presented by Westland Insurance. We're going to have an update on the variety use agreements from Lauren Hadley, and we're going to have a presentation from Saskatchewan Crop Insurance, and they're going to give us an update on their programs, as well as talk a bit about the research they're doing into germination losses during storage. That's something that the Saskatchewan seed growers have been asking them about, and they've been doing some reviews. I'd like, again, special thanks to Discovery Seed Labs for presenting this Seed Talk Series seminar. Also like to thank our general sponsors, Bayer Seed Growth, Discovery Seed Labs, Westland Insurance, CCAN, Syngenta, FP Genetics, Lewis M. Carter Manufacturing, SGS Canada, Nextseed, Crop Life, and Cantera Seeds. Any more questions? I didn't see any in the Q&A or in the chat. Again, thank you so much to our speakers for contributing to this session, and thank you to everyone for joining us today, and special thanks to Jennifer, Kelly, and Alyssa for helping, and Jeff for helping in the background. And that will bring to an end our session for today. Thank you very much.